it to the Armenian genocide. I got the impression that, for example, the British government is not clever enough that they relied only on those imagined sources and those letters from friends, or how they manage their foreign policies only based on this, what published on newspapers, or they had other sources and other evidences.
Well, when you say the British government, I mean, we'd have to have
because you said, sorry,
time and people, and what, you mean in the 1890s?
1890s, beginning of 20th century.
The sources that I gave you are completely what the British government's policies were at the time. They're all based on those sources, yes. That's, of course, you got later on, that's a different thing. 1915, a colossally different situation. But for this now, this is a simpler one, easy to understand, and it's based on exactly those things. There are other councils. There's another missionary's child up here in Erzurum, a man named Graves, who's a British consul as well. There are other people that are involved in this, and there are other times when Armenians are both killed and when Armenians do killing in the 1890s. But there's a limit to how much you can pack into an hour.
I'm sorry, you said, I don't want to be long here.
Okay.
You said that government wouldn't check the figures they got from Sassoon. So that's why I'm asking the question. You mentioned the word government, British government, and I'm sure they have archives which are open today, and there are books published on those papers. And the other thing, if you keep on separating Sassoon from 1915, then it's truly a sketch. It's not the whole image.
Oh, it's not intended to be the image of the entire history of Turks and Armenians. No, of course not. Nothing. But it is an indication of what was to come, of the kind of prejudice and feeling and acceptance of false statistics.
Well, you can see it in today's press as well. In today's press, sorry, when you have technologies, when you have internet, to have exact figures, but you have mistakes today. You couldn't expect people to have numbers in those days, and you couldn't expect to have other sources rather than letters.
I think we probably have gone through enough, but let me just say this. I don't expect people to have statistics. Yeah. Quite the contrary. I expect people not to make them up and not to lie about statistics.
I totally agree. That's not acceptable.
All
But
right. So
that's just some example.
Maybe
that's not the whole truth.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
Right. One more here and then over here. Okay. I want to emphasize, please be brief and please direct the question to Professor McCarthy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a student studying history. I'm a Turkish student in UK, and my research interests are not Armenian questions, so I don't. Well, I don't have any primary research, so I'm not an expert on this. I don't know. And you said in the beginning that you won't talk about what actually happened, but how people talked about those happenings, etc. So I just want to reflect some of your rhetorical strategies. That how you represented those, and they seemed very interesting for me. Because
is this a question or a rhetorical commentary?
It is a question, yeah. It's a question.
You sound very much like my old speech teacher.
Okay,
who would say,
it is
the
a question.
Problem was this.
No, it's a question. I want just to ask you about why was it relevant that we saw all these Orientalist and colonialist caricatures and pictures and all these little things that were in the American press, which weren't really relevant about Orientalism in the 19th century wasn't about Turks, it wasn't about the Armenians, it wasn't about Kurds. It was a much more general problem about the 19th century, about the imperial project of Europeans and also Americans. So you just selected some pictures, made all this audience laugh, and then continued to your findings about
your question.
So I don't understand why that was relevant to your.
First of all, I'm not interested in Orientalist paradigm. I'm not interested.
Sorry, just let me finish. What you presented was not about the Armenian question. It was about 19th century Orientalism. So if you're not interested in Orientalism, then why was it relevant for our purposes here?
I'm not in any way interested in Orientalism or the Orientalist question or the counter to that. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, sorry.
You're done. All right. Specifically, I'm interested in what lies were reported, and I say very definitely that what is believed today and appears in many history books is based on what I showed you. That is the reason. The prejudice, and as I say, I've gone out of my way to write more than 300 pages on the topic. So if you think that's because I'm considering Orientalism, I think you'll find that the term isn't even used in the book. So all I can say about your Orientalism idea and whether I reflect or don't reflect the paradigm is it's not what I intend, and if I do, it's purely accidental.
Just a little one, sorry.
Thank you, Jim McCarthy, for coming. At the beginning of your talk, you said that you were going to tell us about false allegations made against the Turks in the 1890s and then compare them to those made in relation to the events of 1915. In actuality, your entire talk was about the 1890s, and only in your conclusion did you mention the events of 1915 without making any substantiation whatsoever as to how the genocide of 1915 is just 1890s style falsehood. Given that your conclusion is that there was no genocide in 1915, don't you think that you should have dedicated at least some time to 1915 instead of just talking about the 1890s?
Number one, if I said that, I really apologize, because I never, as it said in the beginning, it said I was specifically talking about Sassoon. So did anyone else hear me say that? I don't believe I said anything like that, and I surely didn't intend to. Now, I've given a number of talks on the whole idea of genocide, on what happened in 1915, and some other time I'd be glad to do that. But all I can say about what you're saying is I did deliberately what I intended to do, and that's all I can say. Some other time I'd be glad to talk about 1915 and whether it was a genocide. My own feeling, incidentally, is that the problem, well, I won't go into that for 1915. Somebody else is...
Hi, my name is Prof. I'm from Mush. You can see I am Kurdish, and you give percentage of Armenians and 25% of population. I'm here,
Yeah.
all region. My question is very simple one. Where is those people, 25% of population?
Well, unfortunately, you once again are going to 1915, right? You see, you keep on wanting to get me to drag. Let's put it simple. It is impossible, no matter what parliaments say and no matter what people or the propagandists say, it is impossible to consider detailed historical questions with short, quick answers. There is a genocide, there isn't a genocide. It's not that way. And when you ask me what happened to people in 1915, well, for God's sake, read my books. Listen to other talks, but don't expect me to give you 5 hours of discussion here. Where are my books? I suggest, if you want to find where my books are, I suggest try the British Library.
Justin, you can answer his question. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. Well, Professor McCarthy has answered your question. So I'm going to go ahead. The lady here. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. McCarthy. My name is Sims Abbas. I'm Iraqi Turkmen representative in London. I really enjoyed your lecture, and I hope the rest of my colleagues, they enjoyed it as well. I'm just thinking that all these reports that they have been depending on the machinery's report, while they are just, these conflicts which the superpowers, they depend on to put more pressure on Turkey. So whenever they want to put more pressure, they use it as to declare, or they identify that this massacre happened in that time. But while they turned their eyes blind, what's happening in Nicaragua, Karabakh, in Azerbaijan, which just happening recently, and on everybody knows what's happening in there, but just they turn their eyes blind, not seeing that what's happening there, but they do depend on the machinery report to not what's happening in there in 80s, 19. That's really a double standing, and then it's put in front of us one thing that I think Turkey, they have to form a commission to start to have independent investigation in that area, what happened in there, rather than depending on the European or American, what they will decide to what happened at that time. So it is putting pressure on Turkey to start to form this commission and to ask others to join them. Either if they like to have international independent commission, they're welcome to join, or they just refuse and they had identified what Turkey decide. And thank you very much, Dr. McCarthy.
I want to reiterate that all of these questions will only benefit from commissions, from studies, from all sides getting together and going over these topics. Hopefully without screaming at each other, because that doesn't really solve any problems at all.
Thank you. Okay. Couple more, one here and then the lady here. Go ahead. Can we have the microphone down here, please? Here. Yes.
Hello, I'm Grant. I'm studying at Oxford, and I'm just curious if you could comment. You've talked a lot about different sources and unreliable sources, so I'm curious if you can comment on where your sources are from, and because I'm sympathetic as much to the Turkish side in the issue as many of the people here, but I'm somewhat skeptical at saying we should deriding something because it's an Armenian source, like you said, the missionaries were getting, as much as I am against deriding something because it's just the Turkish side.
No, I agree with, are you done?
I'm just curious about your methodology.
No, I'm trying to say, of course, you realize I was not writing about what happened. The sources I use when I write about what happened include Armenian sources. And I agree with you completely that no one set of sources is to be avoided. You should try to study everything you can from every source. And I think in my writings, if you look, you'll find that I have tried to do that. Not necessarily successfully. I can't use Georgian sources very well because I don't understand them. And I don't even understand the people in Georgia and America, much less than that. I try not to do that. What I was saying here is that these are only one source. They're orchestrated source. I believe they come from the Hunchak party. Now, but I did make a point of saying this is just an impression of mine, that I couldn't prove that. And I definitely mean that. I wasn't talking today about what I believe to be true. What I was talking about was specifically the bad sources that are used when an assertion is made. I would suggest that to study this, we look at the investigation committees, both the Ottoman and the European ones, and we use those as the basis of our investigation because they're the only people that actually study. Now notice I'm saying we take the evidence of Turks, Kurds, Armenians, Europeans that studied, and the Ottoman government. So my suggestion would be those, and I might add that I'm actually writing a book on that. So you'll get to see whether I'm using the sources or not.
What are those sources, though?
The investigation committees that actually looked at what happened, which the European advisors, the three that I mentioned, but also the Ottoman Commission itself, and the report that the Ottoman Commission made. I mean, those are the things, because it's like in a court, you want people that actually investigated the story, not just people that come up and say, I heard from a friend, I heard from a friend, I heard from a friend. The history we have now is written on those, I think, very bad sources. I think we should rely on those that actually interviewed the people who were there, that actually went to the places to see what happened. That's my point. And while I didn't do that here, I must admit, I'm not going as quickly as I'd like to on the book, but eventually we'll get done with that and you'll be able to see. And then you'll be able to judge, and you should. You should look at my work and see whether I have used all the sources I should. You're acting exactly as a historian should in asking that question. Huh? But you've got to apply that to everybody. I was given yesterday, just to look over very briefly, a report made by, what was the name of the?
Robertson.
Yeah, Robertson. I looked at that, and if you look at the footnotes, you realize that every single one is a book written in English by someone who is tied to a certain side of the issue, and not a single opposing view was considered. That's wrong. And if I do that, take me to task, give me trouble,